Welcome back to part 2 of Murder and Drama in Cowley County. This week we'll focus our attentions once again on Winfield. So let's take a little trip there. Today we're actually going to talk about 2 events of murder and drama that took place in Winfield. It's a little bit windy today and for sure very loud here on the corner of 9th and Main Street. I would like to show you something that's in the sidewalk right in front of the sushi place. Have you ever noticed the star in the sidewalk? Do you know where it came from and what it means? Well, you're about to find out. It was October 25th, 1893, when 2 troublemakers by the name of Wilbur Norton and Morgan Wright were in a bar on North Main Street. They had a gun on them and they were waving it around, so the police were called. When the police came, they hid the gun in some straw bales, and since the police couldn't find anything, they just left them there. Later on that day, a police constable named Hugh Sivard went and arrested an employee of the bar and took him to jail. And here's a picture of Hugh Hicks Sivard. He had heard that our 2 troublemakers, Norton and Wright, were saying that they wanted to kill Sivard and the owner of the Winfield Courier. Why they wanted to kill the owner of a newspaper, I don't know. Anyways, Constable Sivard went and got an arrest warrant for the 2. Constable Sivard went to the bar on North Main Street and managed to arrest Norton. He walked him back down Main Street towards the jail, which, as we know by now, is on 9th Street, when he was confronted by Morgan Wright, the friend of Wilbur Norton. Morgan Wright yelled at Constable Sivard to let his friend go. Of course, he didn't do that. So Wilbur Norton stepped aside and told Wright to shoot the son of a, insert name for female dog here. You're the son of a female dog, aren't you? Nothing wrong with that, if they're as cute as you are. And that's exactly what Morgan Wright did. Shot Constable Sivard. Where did this happen? You guessed it? On the corner of 9th and Main, where that star is. Now, Constable Sivard did not die at that spot. He died 2 hours later in the offices of the Winfield Courier, where people had taken him. Morgan and Wright got away, but the police were in hot pursuit because, oh yes, another lynch mob was waiting for them. So actually they were glad to go to jail because a lynch mob, as we know, is not a good thing if they're out for you. On May 21st, 1894, 7 months after the shooting, this star was embedded into the sidewalk to commemorate the place where Constable Sivard was shot. The star was made of badges contributed by 26 members of the various orders and organizations that Sivard belonged to. We are back at Union Cemetery, and we actually did find Hugh Sivard's grave this time. Last time we were looking for it but couldn't find it, and so I emailed the record keeper of the cemetery and she helped me out and let me know where it is, and this is it. The headstone is very interesting. I'll just show you what's engraved on there. I did a cemetery tour a few years ago, and it seems like during the time that Sivard was buried, these type of gravestones were popular. It depicts a tree stump that's cut off, and during that tour we were told that that symbolizes that a life was cut short. Constable Sivard was 54 years old when he died. And that is the end of our first story. The second event we're going to talk about took place in the same area on 9th and Main in Winfield, but it was 10 years later, on August 13th, 1903, and it has gone down in history as the Winfield Band Massacre or the Cayman Band Massacre. Imagine a big stage in the middle of the intersection of 9th and Main Street in Winfield. Imagine a band playing every Thursday night for entertainment. Of course, that's not exactly how this intersection looked like back in 1903. This picture shows the intersection around that time. You can see there are two banks on each corner, and there are trolley tracks because there used to be a trolley in town. The stage was in the intersection set up, as already mentioned. There was not much entertainment during those times, and the band playing was a big thing. Now, Winfield had a population of about 5,500, and there were between 1,000 and 5,000 people wanting to listen to the concert. And here's just a little picture thrown in so you can see what it looks like today, so you can compare. The band was named the Cayman Military Band just because their band leader's name was Cayman. They were also known as the Winfield Band. They were a municipal band, and their concerts were free. During intermission of the band, a man stepped out from an alley. His name? Gilbert Twig. He carried with him a 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun and a smaller handgun. He knelt down like he had learned it in the military and started shooting into the crowd, into the band, everywhere. 20 minutes later, 6 people had died, 3 were wounded and died later, and 25 people were injured. This was the first mass shooting of its kind in the United States. A single shooter shooting into a crowd without a specific target. But who was Gilbert Twig? And why did he do this? Gilbert Twig was born around February 1868 in a town called Flintstone in Maryland. At some point, he visited his uncle in Winfield, nobody really knows when that was, and decided to stay. I put up a Google map for you so you can see how far Winfield is from Flintstone. Now remember, 17 and a half hours by modern car. They had no such cars back then. Soon after Twig moved to Winfield, he began to work as a miller in a flour mill in Burden, and later he worked for the Baden Produce Company in Winfield for several years. This picture was taken a year after the shooting in 1904 during the big Winfield flood. Twig was well liked in society. He was considered to be bright, to have a good background and character, and be good looking. At some point, he met a young woman named Jessie Hamilton, who was born in Winfield, and proposed marriage. She accepted, but the marriage did not take place. For some reason, Jessie Hamilton broke it off, and Gilbert Twig was devastated. Twig continued to work for the Baden Produce Company, but he wanted out of Winfield after the breakup. So 2 years later, in July 1896, 28-year-old Gilbert Twig enlisted in the United States Army and headed for St. Louis, where he joined the 8th Cavalry and shipped out to Camp Force in Huntsville, Alabama. Within a year, he earned a promotion to corporal due to his good marksmanship, meaning good shooting skills. Twig thought that the 8th Cavalry would be sent to Cuba, where he wanted to see some action, but they were passed over for the deployment. So he switched to the 17th Company Signal Corps. He shipped out in December 1898 where he was assigned as a telephone operator, but he never saw any combat. And his enlistment was due to expire the following April. But he did want to see combat, and so he re-upped with the Signal Corps for a second 3-year term. Twig finally got what he was looking for when he was shipped out to the Philippines in July of 1899. The Philippines was in the middle of a brutal conflict with the United States. After the end of the Spanish-American War, the Philippines expected independence, but the United States maintained them as a colony. There was a lot of fighting going on, and it led to the death of 4,200 American troops, more than 20,000 Filipino soldiers, and as many as 200,000 Filipino civilians. During this time, Twig's personality began to change. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was the terrible conditions, maybe it was PTSD. But we do know that Twig had his first major conflict involving an army officer and a contract surgeon. The details were never known, but clearly something had happened to Gilbert Twig, and he never forgot this conflict. His 3-year enlistment ended on April 29, 1902, and Twig had been promoted to sergeant. He was discharged in California with another citation for excellent service. He did not return to Winfield, but found work at the Royal Milling Company in Great Falls, Montana. Less than a year later, Twig decided to move back to Winfield after visiting family there. Before he left Great Falls, he had tried to get his old job back at the Baden Produce Company, but they wouldn't hire him back. He had left his job in Great Falls under murky circumstances, so there was some suspicion that his mental state was going downhill. He even tried to get a job at the Winfield Telephone Company, but they wouldn't hire him either. Twig couldn't find a job anywhere, so he spent most of his time loitering around in parks or staying in his room at his boarding house, which was in the Thompson Building at the time, on Millington and 9th Street. Here's a little video of the Thompson Building on 9th and Millington. Twig still visited his aunt and uncle from time to time, who didn't live far from his boarding house, but they noticed his strange behavior. He was talking about being doped in Great Falls and the community turning against him, but they weren't the only ones that noticed his deteriorating mental state. On the police force in Winfield was a man named George Nichols. He was the only black officer on the force. In fact, his parents, who had moved from Topeka shortly after the town of Winfield was founded, were the first black family in town. This is a picture of the Winfield police force, with Officer Nichols all the way on the right. He told his bosses about Twig and that something should be done, but he didn't feel like he should handle it. On August 1st, Twig entered a local hardware store and bought a shotgun, ammunition, and a pistol. The shopkeeper wondered about the ammunition and asked him, "What are you going to do with that?" And Twig answered, "I don't know yet." Twig continued to wander the streets and the parks, muttering to himself about the young lady who had dumped him so many years ago, following him everywhere, even to the Philippines. He went and took out wads of cash from the banks and sent his brothers $300 each, which was a lot of money at the time. A few hours before that concert on August 13th, 1903, Twig went to visit his uncle, and he had his shotgun with him. Now the uncle thought, oh, he's probably just going hunting, and didn't think much of it and went to bed. Twig took a little wagon and his guns and set himself up in an alley near a shoe store, not far from the intersection. Let's go there. This is the Union State Bank, a building that did not exist in 1903. It's located on the northwest side of the intersection of 9th and Main in Winfield. This used to be a bookstore right here in this lot, and next to it was a shoe store. There was also an alley right next to the shoe store. And this must have been the position of Gilbert Twigg when he started shooting at the crowd that had visited the band concert. Okay, I had to throw a map in there. You know I had to do it. The red dot depicts Gilbert Twigg's position in front of the shoe store, so you can have an idea of where the stage was and where he was. George Nichols was on duty as a night watchman that night, and when he heard the gunshots, he ran towards them, trying to find the shooter. He and another officer encountered Twigg in an alley. Twigg could have shot many more people, but when he saw the two coming towards him, he raised his pistol and shot himself. He was not immediately dead, and his body was taken to the bandstand and laid out. Somebody ran for help to find a doctor, but they were busy with all the wounded and the dead. His uncle, Argyle, identified Twigg. And while everything else was going on, Twigg died. The morning after the shooting, police raided Twigg's room in the boarding house, and they found that he had written a manifesto. In it, he told about how he had been doped up, how people had turned against him, how he had been driven from place to place. He mentioned the breakup with his girlfriend, and he mentioned the fight he had with the officer and the doctor in the Philippines. He ended the letter with adios. But the story doesn't end there. Gilbert Twigg's uncle tried to have a church service for the funeral and find a cemetery that would accept him, but none of the cemeteries wanted to have Gilbert Twigg's body. There is a marker at Union Cemetery, a military marker, but it is rumored that his body is not there. Rumor has it that he is buried somewhere at Highland Cemetery, but not within the cemetery itself. But it is said that they would only accept him if he was buried in an unknown grave outside of the fence, right outside the fence, away from the others. There may be something to that, because Union Cemetery did not have any burial records for Gilbert Twigg. I didn't ask at Highland Cemetery, but Union has a marker, but no burial records. Another rumor surfaced later that Twigg hadn't actually shot himself, but that it was Nichols who had shot him to stop the killing spree. Now, Nichols was regarded as somewhat of a hero after the incident, so why would he not admit, if it was true, that he had killed Twigg? Well, Nichols was a black man who would have killed a white man, and even if it was justified, there was always the fear of racism and retaliation. George Nichols, by the way, always denied the rumors were true. George Nichols wanted to retire from the police force a few years later, but he was talked into staying a little longer, and he died in 1944 and is also buried at Graham Cemetery, which is north of Union Cemetery, and we'll go there in a little bit. This is Gilbert Twigg's military marker, and the strange thing is that there are flowers at this marker. And here's a little plaque that tells that he was a Spanish war veteran. It It says Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Philippines. How strange. George Nichols's grave is in Graham Cemetery, which is right adjacent to Union Cemetery on the north side. They kind of grew together. So this is where George Nichols is buried. We're on our way to Highland Cemetery. That's a cemetery located south of Winfield. And we're trying to scope out where Gilbert Twigg's real grave site may be. Nobody knows if he's really buried there. I've read reports where his grave site is marked by a yellow flag, but nobody really knows. This is the northwestern end of the cemetery, and according to a report that I read, his gravesite is supposedly out here somewhere beyond the fence. We're just going to take a little walk. There's a little walking path. There's my pilot right there. So we're walking down this path, and I'm sure we're not the first ones to come down here to look. But I just wanted to try anyways, just out of curiosity. Well, as expected, we didn't see anything. But I guess it was worth a try. We've talked a lot about Gilbert Twigg, but now it's time to mention the victims. The people that Gilbert Twigg killed that day were Sterling Race, Will Bowman, Dawson Billiter, Otis Carter, Roy Davis, Elmer Farnsworth, Fort Smith, Charlie Thomas Nee, and of course, the ninth and final victim was Gilbert Twigg himself. Many of these victims are buried at Union Cemetery. That was a lot of gruesome information right there. But whatever happened to Jessie Hamilton, the young lady who chose not to marry Gilbert Twigg and break up with him? In 1900, she married a man named Ernest Kramer, and they moved to Wichita. She had 5 kids, but that did not stop her from becoming a leading voice in the women's right to vote movement. In 1921, she was the first female juror in a Wichita criminal case. So she was on it. Yay, Jessie! I hope you enjoyed this little excursion into Cowley County's history, and I'll say goodbye until next time.